I'm Steve Moise. I'm the State Investment Officer for the state of New Mexico, and I am in charge of running our permanent funds, our sovereign wealth funds for the state. We have about a $20.7 billion sovereign wealth fund for our 2.1 million population in New Mexico. And it is my absolute honor to do this. I've been doing it for 6 years and had been retired before I took this position. I'm a lawyer by training, and I've been able to hire excellent investment professionals. We have an excellent communications professional working full-time in our office, so he helps us do that. We report to the legislature and to our board. We also report to the general populace through the various media outlets, and try not to overdo that, but when we have a good story or something we think should be understood by the people, we put that out. The key misconception is a lack of understanding of what the money goes for. This is a 55-year-old fund. The proceeds, the earnings from the fund each year go to fund 12 to 15% of New Mexico's state budget. And most people in New Mexico have never been told this. So part of my job is to educate the populace, to educate the legislature about the value of a sovereign wealth fund. We are not the policymakers, we are the investors. The legislature makes the policy along with the executive. Our job is to present the facts to the legislative committees and to the public, and to allow the legislators and the executive to make those decisions. The pressure has, over the past few years, has been to increase our 5% spending policy to something more than that, 6 or 6.5%, to fund early childhood education, which is a very worthy goal. The message that we convey is that if you distribute, say, an additional $110 million per year, specifically for that use, over the long term, it's costing the permanent funds a lot more than that in terms of what they are unable to earn. The long-term view is that we want to stabilize the inflows with the outflows. So we have created something called an intergenerational equity index, which we're using to try to educate the public. If the scale is out of balance, that is not what the funds were intended for. They were intended to provide equally for the current and future generations. So graphically, we try to simply portray whether we are in balance or out of balance. You're correct, the inflows are much less than they have been in the past. The outflows remain the same, so it's up to us not to take additional risk, but to try to earn as much as we possibly can on a risk-adjusted basis to at least partially make up for that difference. We have learned a lot about the structure of our board. We have the State Investment Council, so we are a council of 11 people to whom I report. And the ability to structure an appropriate board for institutional investment management is so critical. We've learned from New Zealand how their model works, and I think this is something I will take back to our board. And if they like the idea, perhaps we'll present it to the legislature either this year or next year. There are other things we've learned about similarities and differences. We've learned that we all have very similar issues, and I've been able to learn from others how they deal with them, and that's very important. I was brought in 6 years ago to try to restore trust in the permanent funds. We'd had issues with the prior administration. So it has taken us these 6 years to try to rebuild that good feeling between those of us running the permanent funds and the general public. Gaining the additional autonomy is difficult. I think we are to the point now that the public knows we are running a professional investment management firm. And that's what we want to convey. We want people to understand that we have excellent investment managers, that we have wonderful funds in which we're invested, and we are finally to the point of wanting to ask the legislature and the executive to give us a bit more flexibility with personnel and budget. It's difficult because based on what has happened in New Mexico in the past, the reins are tight, and even though they do understand we're doing things properly, they might give us that flexibility, but it will be slow in coming. When I came in almost 7 years ago, 6.5 years ago, 40% of our funds were being managed internally. I then hired our chief investment officer. The two of us were in total agreement that we needed to outsource everything, which is what we've done. Some people today believe that it's smart to begin pulling things back and managing more in-house in order to save on fees, etc. We don't agree with that because of the way we're structured. If you can properly compensate your investment professionals, that's a good idea because you can hire top-notch people. Most of us in state investment management are hamstrung to some degree because we cannot compete with the private sector in terms of our ability to compensate. The ability to provide a consistent stream of revenue to the state, which will cause the citizens to be comfortable with the stability of state government to the degree that's possible, has been broadcast widely during this conference, and it's something that I will take back and I will repeat consistently in the messages that we craft. The fact that we are part of a global family of sovereign wealth funds and that we are now better connected with those funds than we ever have been is something else that I will convey to our stakeholders. And I think as a result of that, we have the ability to communicate electronically or by phone, however we may wish, with these leaders who are doing such good things in the sovereign wealth world that when we have issues, we can get responses and we can also share the good things that we've been able to implement. We have reduced our target or our expected rates of return. We now have a 7% target rate of return for one of our funds, a 6.75 expected rate for the other fund, because it has a little bit of New Mexico economic development in it. We also have changed our asset allocations, and we have reduced our equity holdings, as many others have, and increased our real asset holdings, the ability to produce income from those assets. And we think that will serve us well in the future, as well as increased private equity investing.